Hello, Garland Nixon here, and in a shock to no one who's been watching this channel, the Azov Nazis are have been planning terror attacks in Italy. Let's talk. Well, if you have been watching this channel for some period of time and you look back into my old videos, you will recall this discussion. No, I am not Nostradamus. I'm not some soothsayer who looked into the future and figured out something, or I had it was revealed to me by some supernatural force. It didn't take that. As I have said many, many times, and I always attribute it to the original source, the tuna, Bill Parcells, former coach of the New York Giants. And I will quote that gentleman: "You are what your record says you are." And if we look at the Middle East, what do we have? The United States went there, they built ISIS, created ISIS, and to this day, the United States funds ISIS style terrorist attacks, turns their back on turns their head on the countries that are whose governments are funding it, and in many instances provide the funding and training and even air force for ISIS related groups. And of course, they've attacked all over the Middle East, and including many areas in even the United States and in Europe. So now, a while back on this channel, we had this discussion, and the discussion was simple. This is what's going to happen. Nazis, terrorists, ISIS terrorists, vanilla ISIS, the nice Nazis have been called. It doesn't matter what you use. The US is fomenting terrorism. They are supporting, they are arming terrorist groups. And of course, as I said, again, as many people said, they're going to attack in Europe. It's just a matter of time. Europe is now going to get what the US is turning Europe into the Middle East. They're funding terrorists. They're arming terrorists in your neighborhood. You know what's going to happen in your neighborhood when you got terrorists in your neighborhood. Let's talk about this. Alex Rubinstein over at the Gray Zone. The arrest of Italian neo-Nazis affiliated with the Ukraine Azov battalion highlights the terrifying potential for blowback from the Ukraine proxy war. Oh, my friends, it's going to be a whole lot more than potential. Italian police announced a series of raids against a neo-Nazi Order of Hagel organization accused of stockpiling weapons and planning terror attacks. The group has established operational ties to the Ukrainian Azov battalion. So why don't we just call them the Americans? Team America, World Police. 5 members of an Italian neo-Nazi organization were arrested November 15th. Additional member remains wanted, so they're still running about. He happened to be in Ukraine fighting Russian forces alongside the Azov battalion, which has been formally integrated into the Ukrainian military. So they arrest these Nazis, and one of their boys is still in Ukraine fighting with Nazis. You know what? I will say this to the Italian government: you're funding Nazis, you're arming Nazis, they're going to come home and kill Italians. Don't get mad at the Nazis. People in Italy, don't get mad at the Nazis. Your government and NATO and the EU has funded and armed Nazis. What do you think? Nazis do Nazi things, brothers. Nazis do Nazi things. Listen to this. They're accused of plotting terrorist attack on civilian and police targets. A sixth a sixth member of the group, now considered a fugitive, is in Ukraine, embedded with the Azov battalion. Well, guess what? He's a hero. The United States recently, check this out, the U.S. recently brought a bunch of Azov battalion scum to the United States. They met with the government, they met with Congress, they wandered around, they were out in front of the White House, they took them to New York to talk to groups. They brought Nazi scum to America. So I guess maybe they were planning to blow it up here. Let's face it, it wouldn't be the first time the United States just blew up the damn EU pipeline. So maybe the Nazis are just doing, they're just doing what the US is doing. Why shouldn't they? If the US is going to attack the infrastructure of the EU, why shouldn't the Nazis do the same thing? Look, the US is attacking the EU infrastructure, and they're funding Nazis. So we have a consistent line of logic here. I'm going to blow you up your pipelines. I'm going to pay these guys. They're going to say, hey, boss, you're blowing up the pipelines. I think I'll join in. Hey, what can we attack? Well, they're Nazis. They like civilian targets, police stations, things of that nature. At any rate, the war on Europe, the U.S. is blowing up their infrastructure. The U.S.'s proxies, the Nazis are now attacking Europe. What else do you expect, Europe? What else do you expect? You know what chickens do? You know what they do when it gets dark? They come home to roost. That's all chickens do. Don't get mad at chickens. Once it gets dark, you already know. They're coming home to roost. That's what they're doing. Members of the Order of Hegel reportedly maintained direct and frequent contacts over Telegram with not just Azov Battalion, but also neo-Nazi Ukrainian military formations, Right Sector, Centuria, probably in the view of possible recruitment into the ranks of these fighting groups. The Italian investigation was launched in 2019, included extensive computer searches, wiretaps, and blah, 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 blah. One of the arrested members was reportedly dangerously close to far-right Ukrainian nationalist groups, was planning to attack on a police station in Naples, according to wiretaps. The fugitive fighter is a Ukrainian citizen who has lived in Italy, but is currently fighting on behalf of the Ukrainian armed forces. He planned to attack the Volcano Buono shopping mall in Naples. 2021, Testa said he would make a massacre like the one in New Zealand, but I wouldn't go to the blacks. I would go to the barracks in Marigliana. He was referring to the New Zealand mall shooter who claimed to have visited Ukraine and wore a Nazi Sonnenrad or black sun patch on his flak jacket as he slew 51 worshippers. The symbol, as the New York Times noted in 2019, is commonly used by the Azov Battalion, right? In February 2021, Testa ran it over the phone, stating, like Tarrant 2222 in the Magliani barracks, boom, boom, I killed them all. So this guy is like, hey, man, look, in the same way that this other Nazi who came to Ukraine killed a bunch of people, I'm going to do it, man. I'm blowing them all up. Footage of the arrest broadcast by the news channel Sky TG24 shows long knives, a Nordic-style axe, a bat emblazoned with the words Leader Mussolini, a swastika flag, a gas mask, an Azov Battalion T-shirt, and Valhalla Express, a memoir by the Azov fighter. Right, and there's the report. But Ukraine is not the only country to have visited by members of the Order of Hagel. Some members also traveled to Israel to train in Krav Maga and the use of long and short weapons, according to police. In fact, officials, in fact, they were even given diplomas for completing the training. While Nazism has found a safe space in the Ukrainian armed forces, the arrest and warrants against the members of the Order of Hagel that planned terror attacks suggest the potential for blowback from NATO's Ukraine proxy war as battle-hardened, ideologically extreme veterans, encouraged by Western governments, supported with U.S. and EU aid, return home to cities across Europe. Right? So it goes on. A 2022 Department of Homeland document, the Homeland Security doc, acknowledged that Ukrainian nationalist groups, including the Azov movement, are actively recruiting racially or ethnically motivated violent extremist white supremacists. So here's the thing. Let's talk about this. So long ago, a couple months ago, I did and this is not to blow my own horn. This is just to say this. I did a video a while back, and I said, look, this is what's going to happen. And I wasn't the only one. A lot of people were saying, you're sending all of these weapons to Ukraine. They're not being accounted for. And what you're going to end up is a bunch of well-armed militia groups and Nazis attacking people. I remember interviewing Scott Ritter one time, and he said, look, what happens when they get mad at the German government and they've got anti-tank shoulder-fired anti-tank missiles, and the Germans government, the German leader, the German prime minister, president, whatever, his motorcade's going down the road, and you got 3 or 4 Nazis on top of a building with anti-tank weapons. They're going to attack. Yeah, and what is this about Italy? Here's what I think it is. And I mean, everybody watching probably already knows what I'm going to say. They're pissed at Italy. Italy is now saying we are not going to send more weapons. And, look, Italy's backing off. They got a new government. I'm not saying that in my understanding is that in public, the new government is saying, yeah, we're all in. And in private, the new government saying, no, we ain't all in. So it is clear and obvious the people of Italy want out. They elected a government wherein the new prime minister, whatever her name is, Bologna or something, I'm not sure. Bologna, I'm not sure. Whatever her name is, Maloney, I think it is. But her name is irrelevant. Has come out and the pro forma stuff. Said the pro forma, yes, I'm in, and we support Ukraine and blah blah blah. We're hearing members of her cabinet. There's certainly an air of uncertainty surrounding Italy amongst the NATO hawks, because it certainly appears that they kind of want an off ramp. So you can look at Hungary, you can look at Italy, you can look at some parts of Germany, and you can say these are targets for the Nazis, because the Nazis are, what do? They only know one thing, and that is violence, viciousness, attack people. So they're going to look at Italy and say, oh, you don't want to go along with it, we'll fix you. And they're going to attack and slaughter civilians exactly like ISIS does. They're going to do what ISIS does because they are who ISIS is. They're extremists, violent fruitcakes. And that's what you can expect. And now Europe, what are they going to do? They're going to try to whip. Let me change that. I was going to say the countries that won't go along with what they want, they're going to try to whip them in the line, but I'm wrong. It's actually something completely different. Because they're Nazis, they're just plain violent. They ain't trying to whip anybody into line. They're not trying to do some kind of a political action so that if they do that, they can get the Italians. That ain't the way Nazis think. The way Nazis think is this: you ain't doing what I want, I'll fix you, I'll kill you. That's it. That's it. They're like, the Italians are not going along. What are we going to do? We'll attack and kill lots of Italians, as many as we can. That's the way they think. It's not a matter of we've got a strategy here to politically influence the Italians to join in with our fight. No, that ain't the way Nazis do things. It's you're either with us or you're against us. And if you're against us, we'll kill you. And that's the plan. So Europe, bad news, Europe, bad news. You thought your economic woes were bad, and they are. I've had that discussion. We don't have to go over it again. In brief, the United States is taking all of your industry. They're shutting you down, and your industry, as much as they can get, will come to the U.S. The rest will go wherever it goes, but they're going to rob you blind, so you're going to be impoverished. That's bad enough. That's bad. It's not good. It's really, really, really bad. But there's a second part of this thing, and that is they're arming Nazis, and they don't care, because let's face it, they're going to, the U.S. is an arms sales, a country, and the arms makers don't care if they're selling it to you or if they're selling it to the U.S. government. They just want to sell it. The U.S. goes to an area of the world and pumps weapons into that area. Right now, what are they doing in Asia? They're trying to pump as many weapons as they can in Asia. Why? Because it pays. That's one of the reasons it pays. It's profit. So now these weapons makers are pumping as many weapons as they possibly can into the Europe, because it pays. That's why the weapons makers are doing it. Forget all of the political and geostrategic reasons that the government may have. And a lot of the government they got their cronies. They're pumping weapons into the hands of their cronies. Their cronies are hiring them back, et cetera, et cetera. You've got the carousel where Lloyd Austin is with the government, then he's with Raytheon, then he's with the government. If he leaves the government, he'll be back with Raytheon. You know what I mean? So they got this carousel, on and off carousel, where they're constantly getting money. So there's a lot of money to be made. But the problem that Europe has, and look what Europe's done. Europe was all in for and when I say Europe, I mean NATO, the EU, the leaders of Europe were all in for arming, going into the Middle East, attacking countries, destabilizing the Middle East, spreading weapons everywhere, and it was fine as long as those weapons trickled out of Afghanistan and Syria all to the rest of the Middle East and blew stuff up. Right now, good and damn well sure right now in Iran, it's not talked about in the US. They're like, there's a terrorist attack in Iran. That CIA and MI6 and all of the Five Eyes stuff. Right now, they have their eyes on Iran. So right now, the U.S. and its cronies and its stupid colony leaders of its stupid colonies are joining in to do terrorist attacks on Iran to slaughter civilians. A horrible and brutal thing to do. They don't like Iran. They want to overthrow the government, and so they're just going to keep doing things, blowing stuff up, attacking stuff. Terrorism. The U.S. is sponsoring terrorism in Iran. Simple as that. And why wouldn't they? Because they sponsor terrorism all over the world. So now what's going on? Your turn, Europe. Europe's complete turn. It's your turn. The U.S. would shut down economies, steal your business. Right now, what are they doing in Syria? They're stealing their oil. They're occupying the oil fields, the wheat fields, and they're stealing all of their natural resources. Right? They're doing the damn same thing. And the UK the EU and NATO went right along with it. Now, your turn. They're going to steal all your business. They're going to steal all your corporations. And guess what they're going to do? They're going to pump an impoverished, desperate area full of Nazi criminal gangs and thugs and things of that nature. And they're going to load them up full of weapons, and then they're going to get the hell out of the way. And you know what? You're going to be pissed because you're hungry and your working class has no work and all that, but you're gonna have bigger fish to fry. If you got five pounds to go to the mall, you ain't gonna be able to go to the mall because there's gonna be a Nazi waiting there to drive a damn bomb in the mall and blow you to hell or to machine gun you. Your lives will be a living hell in Europe, and this is part of it. I mean, if it's bad enough that the U.S. is wiping out your economy, wiping out your industry. And you know what kills me? I saw this thing recently that said the Europe is or was the UK could be facing the longest recession ever, right? Yeah, that's one way to put it. You're going to be impoverished and deindustrialized. The longest recession forever is a length of time that can be considered long. Okay, that's like somebody dies and they get buried and somebody says, yeah, that person's going to face a long time in the grave. They're going to probably the longest period of their life that they've ever slept. They'll be in that grave. Yeah, they ain't getting out. They're done. They're dead. They're in a grave. They're never getting out. That is their place in the universe at this point. Their remains are in the grave. That's their place. They're done. We all got that coming, right? Well, the UK is going to have a long recession along with the rest of Europe. And it ain't going to be a recession. It's going to be a complete and absolute depression. And if by long you mean forever, yeah, long. Let's call it long then. Let's use that term. But additionally, if that wasn't bad enough, see, you think they're your friend, the US is your friends. If it wasn't bad enough that they're wiping your economy out and dooming you to poverty for eternity, you don't come out of this. You ain't coming out of this one. They're arming Nazis. And what you're going to have now is angry Nazis. So and here's the other problem. As country by country follows Italy, because as these countries get hungrier, as they get more desperate, as they get colder, as their life goes down, let's be blunt here, as their life goes down the shitter, the lives of Europeans are going to be flushed down the toilet by their leaders in the US empire intentionally. And in some ways, the European people in the aggregate are complicit. But not any individual Europeans, but in the aggregate, they're going along with things that they shouldn't go along with, and they're going to pay a price. As you've heard the saying before, I hate to use hackneyed cliches, but I will. You play stupid games, you get stupid prizes. You run around screaming, I hate Russians with a bunch of friggin' blue and yellow flags, and yay. And when somebody says you're supporting Nazis, and you start a sentence off with things like this. Yeah, sure, Ukrainian has Nazis, but That's how you start. You gotta, if you're supporting this craziness, you must start your sentence off by saying, sure, the Ukrainians have Nazis, but anytime you start a sentence off like that, sure, hey, why are you supporting Ukrainian Nazis? Okay, fair enough. Ukrainians have Nazis, but you're complicit, because that's not the way you end that sentence. You're supposed to say the Ukrainians have Nazis, and therefore I can't support Nazis, because that is an extremist, violent, murderous, racist a regime. It is an ideology that is antithetical to everything I believe in. Therefore, I ain't supporting Nazis. That's how you finish the sentence. You don't be, you're not like, yeah, the Ukrainians have Nazis, but the Russians are bad, and Russians are, we don't like Russians, and therefore you will, like, go ahead, let's support, arm these Nazis. We're behind the Nazis 100%. So you got to pretend they're not Nazis, something like that. Maybe you got to fool yourself into believing that you're not supporting Nazis, and just kind of put it over your not. See, when you say, whenever somebody uses the word but, what they're really saying is this. Here's what the word but means in any sentence. Disregard anything I said before the word but. Anytime somebody uses the word, sure, yeah, I might have stolen your car, but what they're saying is disregard that. Yeah, sure, I might be a thief and a liar and a criminal, but in other words, ignore the fact that I'm a thief and liar and a criminal. Sure, there's plenty of Nazis in Ukraine, but that means ignore all of that. I don't give a crap. I'm going to move forward, because I'm okay with supporting Nazis in Ukraine as long as I hate Russians and we can oppose the Russians. You're just saying you're good allying with Nazis. That's what's coming out of Europe and the USA. I know you're getting some pushback here, but like the Democratic Party is, they don't even get that far. The Democrats and the Republicans in the U.S., the loyal party members just say, we've got to stop Putin. And when you say there's Nazis in Ukraine, we're supporting, they can't process a discussion about that because of the obvious moral implications. So rather than process a discussion about that, they just say something like, that's Russian propaganda. See, the real dupes can't even say, sure, they're Nazis, but they just say they're Russian propaganda or something, because that the reality that they're supporting this odious ideology is too difficult for them to wrestle with. They already know that if they admit that they're supporting Nazis, that they don't have a moral or ethical out. So they can't say, yes, I'm supporting Nazis, but. So the real but true believers just have to say, that's Russian propaganda, or whatever, a pushback that says, I don't want to discuss that. But you know who is going to be willing to discuss it? Nazis. So you can say, I don't want to talk about Nazis. I'm going to pretend that there's no Nazis. But if you're in the Volcano Bueno, or whatever the hell the name of that shopping center, that the Nazis that we're going to attack, your ass is grass. They're going to blow you to smithereens. If you're in Germany and they suspect that you weren't sufficiently supportive, bad news for you. There's no Nazis, but they're going to blow your ass to smithereens. They're going to attack you with machine guns. Oh, look, those weapons are coming. They're getting high weapons. They're getting bombs. They're probably going to use some of those howitzer rounds, rig them up for roadside bombs, rig them up for explosions, rig them up so a car or whoever runs over and blows them up, or they blow up. They got all kinds of stuff in Ukraine. So then the U.S. is giving the weapons to Ukrainian Nazis, and at some point their ass is grass in Ukraine. What happens when they lose? What happens when it becomes obvious that they're losing? Right? What happens when they're going down? What happens when the West starts backing that off? When the people in the EU start feeling the pain, which it'll be too late, but whatever, they start feeling the economic pain, and they say, we're protesting, we don't want to continue. The Nazis will go right down into the middle of the protest and torch off some howitzer rounds and blow the hell out of the protesters because they hate them. That's what they'll do. That's coming. Rest assured something. I'm telling you that I believe, I am predicting, I don't like it, I don't want it to happen. I feel sorry for the people that are suffering, but I think at some point the Nazis will be angry at the protesters, and there will be some kind of attack on protests, some kind of attack on people who are pushing back. Because Nazis they're not going to think about it. They're not going to say, wow, if we attack these people, they'll get even more pissed at us and we'll get less support. No, that would be rationalizing and reasoning things out. It would be just like the neocons, who are effectively the same thing, the same. Of course, they would support ideologies such as Nazism, because they have a parallel ideology, shall we say, fascist. As far as they're concerned, as far as the Nazis are concerned, they don't they don't think these things through in the same way that the neocons don't think these things through. So the Nazis will be angry, and when they get angry, they start throwing fists. That's all they're going to do. Nazis are going to go to the protesters and say, "Okay, protesters, you're going to pay." And they're not going to think of what country or how it's going to help the cause or not. No, they're violent, and they're going to swing out in violence. So Europe, two ways Europe is going to pay. And they're going to pay for being complicit with the U.S. empire in so many ways. The U.S. empire has destabilized not just countries, regions of the world, the Middle East. Imagine if the U.S. hadn't attacked all of those countries, blown all of those countries up, slaughtered all of those people, created ISIS, did all the stuff they would. The Middle East would have been able to grow on its own, but the U.S. didn't want it to grow. It wanted to destabilize the Middle East, which meant all of these refugees are going to show up in Europe, destabilize Africa with AFRICOM. Why? So it could steal their resources, so it could control, so it could steal their resources and or control their resources so that its adversaries couldn't access them. And the EU was perfectly willing, and the NATO, all of the leaders of that were perfectly willing to go along with it. The people, unfortunately, the EU either didn't realize what was going on or just turned their heads on it until the reality of it started visiting itself upon them. And that was a whole hell of a lot of refugees flooding in from the destabilized regions. And now with Ukraine, they're going to get Nazis. They're like, we don't want these Muslims to come because some of them might be members of ISIS. Yeah, you created ISIS. You're probably right. You shouldn't. US and the UK, etc. NATO created ISIS. Yeah, you're probably going to get some of it back. Now they have empowered and heavily armed the Nazis of Ukraine. I got bad news. Nazis of Ukraine going back home. When you create, Shelley Franken's book, Frankenstein, and there's been Frankenstein movie after Frankenstein movie. And what is it? What is the Frankenstein movie? You build this monster. At some point, the monster comes back to get you. And you're in the castle, the people are outside, the monster must die, the monster grabs you, he picks you up in the air, he holds you over his head, he looks out over the pitchfork, goes, because I guess if you're a monster, that's, your way of communication. Looks outside, the people, they shake their torches, their pitchforks, the monster must die, and he sees fire coming up, and because monsters are scared of fire, right? He looks, but bad news. The monster's scared of fire. You built the monster, and he still got you over his head. And he hasn't quite made a decision what he's going to do. But the monster might just simply be like, oh my God, I got to run. What am I doing with this heavy weight? I'll just discard it out the window. He's carrying you, Dr. Frankenstein. You have created ISIS. And in this instance, Dr. Frankenstein has created a monster in its hometown. This ain't in South America. This ain't in Africa. This is not in the Middle East. This is in Europe. They have empowered and heavily armed friggin' Nazis in Europe. Good old, and not neo-Nazis. These are not neo-Nazis. They are mistaken by calling them neo-Nazis. Neo implies new. No, brother. Good old-fashioned Nazis. The real deal. The real thing. So now, Europe, you're right now, I would say, in that continuity of violence that unfolds in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. You are at the point where you've created the monster, where the monster has come back. The people are outside, at least in Italy, and they've got pitchforks and they got their torches, and they're screaming into the castle, you have created an evil abomination. It is the devil. It is an abomination. This abomination must be destroyed. You know, Frankenstein, right? And now, of course, the monsters, they chase the monster back in the castle. He's run up there, and you're in there, you know, doing whatever you do. And now the monster has grabbed you, your poor little hapless body, because he's huge, and he's dangling you up like this, and there's fire, and he's going, ah, ah. Bad news. Here's your part right now. You're in the air dangling at the mercies of a monster, holding you up. He's looking around, the fire sweeping up. Now, at some point in this novel, that monster heaves you out the window. I don't care how many times you read or you watch them. I don't care how many times you watch a Frankenstein movie. You know the way it goes. At some point, Dr. Frankenstein goes flying out the window to his death. Never at any time does the monster like say, you know, Dr. Frankenstein, perhaps I was a little hasty here with this whole violence thing. Why don't we sit down and have a cup of tea and some and biscuits, and we'll sit back and, you know, Earl Grey. I prefer Earl Grey. Well, how about you? Or maybe some jasmine tea. We will sip on our tea and we will work out our differences. We will negotiate this thing in an intellectual and diplomatic way. But no, there's no version of Frankenstein where the monster does that. Every version, Dr. Frankenstein dangles and out the window. And like, let's face it, he's fallen 10 stories, so he's going to splat to his death. But even if he didn't, if he were to somehow fall into a fountain or something and survive, do you know what would happen? The people would then pull him out of the fountain and they'd like burn him at the stake or tear him to shreds or something like that. Any way you look at that, the creator of the monster always ends up in a very bad situation. So in that, America and its complicit NATO and EU allies have bragged. You heard Joseph Borrell. That's a firing offense. Joseph Borrell. Yes, the world is out there. Europe is a beautiful garden, and out there is a jungle. And the jungle people may come here and get us. So the garden must protect itself. Well, wait a minute. Last time I checked, the U.S. and its allies are the ones who are going out, and its vassals are the ones who are going out attacking the jungle. They got a jungle. Really, what are they doing? Well, we go out there and we're stealing their bananas and their fruit and all the things they got. We're stealing it and taking it back. Gee, I wonder why the people in the jungle are angry at you. The jungle. You see, let me put it to you like this. Joseph Borrell believes that the Europe, if you see what he's implying, Europe is civilized and the people out there are uncivilized. I'll put it a different way. Europe is industrialized. Industrialization in and of itself does not imply civilization. Let's face it, when the Industrial Revolution started in the US still had slaves. The US was a fascist government. If you got slaves, there's no way you can say we have institutional slavery in our country, but we're not fascist. That don't work. You can say that, but a country that has institutionalized slavery is fascist. And we had an industrial revolution, which was kind of a fascist industrial revolution. You ever heard the term factory towns in the United States? What was that? What were factory towns? The factory would build, and the company store, those are terms well known. The factory owner, the oligarchs that owned them, would build little houses and towns for the people to live in. And the people there would be the workers could go to the company store for their regular needs on credit and get everything they needed. The problem is, by the time they got paid at the end of the month, all of their money went to the factory store, because they didn't have anything left but pennies. So they were impoverished. They had to pay for their place to live to the company. They had to pay for all of their foods and all the things they needed to the company. And at the end of the war, it was a fascist. I'll put it like this. I've often put it to you like this. In the United States, there were degrees of slavery, right? And just as an example, just as an aside, this is an interesting little story. If you study, I love to study, I have studied the 1800s. And pre-Civil War. You'll find this interesting. So Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was considered an anti-slavery book. It humanized slaves and things of that nature. So the South was pissed, right? Oh, okay. The North has launched an attack on slavery. So gave rise to a whole genre of Southern books, which are anti-Northern books. So the most prominent one of them was a book called The Northern Planter's Bride. And interestingly enough, they launched the first, what I would call really kind of devastating and accurate attack on industrial capitalism. It was interesting because what they basically said was, oh yeah, of course, there was yes, our slaves are childlike people and we take care of their needs. And that means rape them all the time and beat them and work them to death and torture them. That's taking care of their needs. Very interesting and self-serving. But here's the part of interest. They said, but look at what you guys are doing. You call yourself, the people you have are white. They're not even black. And look what you're doing to them. You're taking their money, you're abusing them, blah, blah, blah. So interestingly enough, the South, in their defense of slavery, the institution of slavery, launched the first real valid and accurate attack on the capitalist oligarchs. Just an aside, just something to think about there. I just found that was interesting, so I threw it in because it worked within the context of what I'm talking about. So at any rate, but the bad news is you're not going to have to worry about industrial capitalism in the EU anymore. That's done. Industrial capitalism is a thing of the past. The United States needs to rebuild its industry to confront China. So it's going to take yours. Bad news capitalism, for the EU, but it is what it is. And so you won't have industrial capitalism anymore. You will have squalor and poverty at the hands of the EU. And again, what am I supposed to say? You probably made some bad decisions. You're going to wake up one day and say, maybe we should have went in another direction. It's obvious. Something is obvious. The Russians are battening down the hatches. The Russians are looking at the Ukraine and they're saying, you know what? And this is why it's going to hurt Europe really bad. And it actually works in the context of what I'm saying here. It appears to me that the Russians are battening down the hatches for a long fight. That the Russians are looking at it saying, look, we're fighting NATO and time is on our side. So as the Muslim fighters tend to say in the Middle East, you got the watches, we got the time. I think that's what the Russians are doing. They're looking at what's happening and they're saying, here's what we're going to do. Number one, we'll completely continue to strike Ukraine. What's that going to happen is that's going to create another massive flow of refugees. There'll be another massive flow of refugees this winter out of Ukraine into Europe. I don't know how the hell the Europeans are going to deal with that when they can't feed their own, but they're going to have to, because the Russians have made a decision. We are going to lock down. We're going to be prepared. It's obvious their factories are starting to churn out, the stuff that they need for military. They're somewhat on a wartime footing in that the Russians the way their military industry is set up, they have the option of cranking up the dial rather than just being either we're on a peacetime footing or wartime footing. They have the ability to crank up the dial and say we're on a peacetime footing with the dial's at 10% of the weapons we need. They can turn it up to 25, 30, 50% of the weapons that they can possibly produce. And then, of course, they can turn it all the way up to 100% if they're at full open war with NATO or who the hell ever, right? It seems to me they've cranked it up to, say, 50. And they're like, we're just going to keep cranking out weapons. We're going to dig in. We're going to knock the hell out of the infrastructure of Ukraine. And we're going to see how this thing shakes out, because the bottom line is this. It's on our border. That's what the way Russians looking at it. It's on our border. The fight's on our border. We can't back down. We'll see who can last the longest. And they already know what's going to happen in Europe. They may be looking at it saying, however Europe gets through this winter or doesn't get through the winter, by the end of the winter, they have no way to refill their gas tanks for next winter, and they're going to need that stuff over the summer for industry or whatever, which will be gone by then. And the price will be so high, the internal uprisings will be growing. So we'll continue the fight, because I think I'm just speaking as the Russians. They'll continue to back down the hatches. They'll continue the fight. They don't have to have a fast and quick aggressive fight. It could be a slow drag where they, and let me add this. because the Russians can refresh soldiers. So they can send some soldiers to the battle, to the front lines for 3 weeks. Take them back in the back lines, put some other ones in the front lines for 3 weeks or a month. Bring them back and keep fresh soldiers on the front. Because remember, it's the difference between the front lines and the rear guard, right? Flanks, things like that. So you can bring soldiers to the front, let them fight like hell, get them out of the heat, get them some R&R, get new soldiers in. Okay. And set yourself up defensively where you're not taking a lot of losses. And at the same time, continue to inflict losses on Ukraine. And Ukraine can't do that. Ukraine doesn't have. So what is the Ukraine going to do? Have the same soldiers sitting in trenches, getting attacked and bombed from now till next winter and the winter after that and the winter after that? Can Ukraine continue to maintain the same soldiers they have in there and just have them grow up? Have a soldier sitting there saying, I'm 18 years old. What are you doing? Well, I guess I'll be at war in the trenches in my life until I'm 30, or until I get torn to pieces by shrapnel, whichever comes first, most likely the latter. Can they do that? Can the U.S. keep sending money and weapons to Ukraine? That's the other thing. As the West keeps pumping weapons into Ukraine, the Russians keep blowing it up. So they're saying, if we can keep making stuff, they are demilitarizing the West. They're doing something else. And this is interesting. Another thing that's happening is this. Somebody said, nah, ain't going to be no World War III. Well, you can argue that World War III is ongoing, but it's a different kind of war. But here's the thing about this. So the Chinese are cranking out all kinds of new stuff, right? And they're doing everything they can to build up this gigantic defensive military, which means that the U.S. has to look at that and try to counter that. Right? The Russians, they're cranking out new stuff. They're putting it into effect, which means the U.S. has to counter that. So now the U.S. militarily, because the U.S. is at war, at a hybrid war with both Russia and China, as Russia and China develop and deploy these new weapons, the U.S. has to develop and counter deploy weapons against two superpowers at a time when it's $31 trillion in debt and it's going to hell into a depression. So the people are going to be like, what are we doing? We're now spending $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion. All of our money is going into weapons to counter Russia and China. We get nothing, and we're in a depression because that's what we're going to do. Same for Europe. What's Europe going to do? Germany announced, yes, Germany is going to double, triple our war budget, whatever the case, right? Several months back. And people were like, oh my God, not Germany again. And I was like, I don't believe it. Where are they going to get the money from? If you watch my videos, I said that. Yeah, they're saying that now. Where are you going to get the money from? So now they've come back and said, we don't have the money to do it. We're not doing that. All that ramping up military. No, you're not. You don't even have the money to defend yourself right now. You're in poverty and you ain't seen nothing yet. So my point being, I'll leave it at this. My point being, the Russians have dug in. I don't think they're going to do massive attacks. They're going to do massive forward motion, but I think there'll be some. I won't be shocked if they did. It won't shock me if they did. I don't think they're going to. I think it's going to be slow. I think they are perfectly happy fighting a war of attrition. I believe the Russians see a war of attrition as as advantage to them. Their supply lines are shorter. Think about this. Their supply lines are from Russia into new parts of Russia. Their supply lines are, people talk about, oh, they've got to bring it from Crimea. Yeah, but Crimea borders Ukraine. So how far is it from Crimea to Ukraine? About 100 trillionth of a millimeter. The last time I checked, a border, there is no distance. Meanwhile, global capital, which is what this war, globalist capital, this war is globalist capital versus Russia. Globalist capital has to come from all over the place to get there. Then it has to get these weapons, then it has to get the Poland, then it has to get them in, then Russia blows the hell out of them. Then they're all trying to build it as fast as they can at a time when their economies are crashing. And as the resistance grows in Europe, the heavily armed Nazis will have two enemies they have to fight. They will have to fight the Russians because they don't like the Russians. They want to fight the Russians. But any country, any nation, there'll be groups. There'll be like anti-war groups. Yay, let's stop this war right now. You'll find neo-Nazi attacks on them, blowing them up, machine gun, whatever. This is coming. This is coming. This Italy thing is just, I mean, this is the beginning. This is the start of something that's going to be freaking ugly. And you can thank the neocons and the Biden administration and the idiot leaders, the lunatic idiot US neocon puppets that disguise themselves as European leaders. They ain't European leaders. They're neocon US puppets. They're not leaders. They are not in any way related. Olaf Scholz and von der Leyen, the rest of these scum, they are in no way related to Europe. They are there to do the job of the US empire, which is they are there to manage the economic destruction of Europe. That's what they're there for now. It's obvious. They're there as the managers. The US is saying we are going to economically destroy Europe, and we need some mid-level managers. Hey, von der Leyen, Borrell, Sunak, whoever the hell, come together. We got to have a managers meeting. Your job is to manage the economic destruction of Europe. And the main thing I want you to do is keep your people pumped up so they can scream, we hate Russia. Just keep doing that. Keep everything blue and yellow, lots of blue and yellow flags around. And then when we're all done, you guys come on up here. We got a nice gated community for you in just outside of Miami, and you'll be perfectly safe. Meanwhile, those poor sons of bitches back in Europe will be being chased around by the Nazis that are going to be heavily armed. All the arms that we sent them, they will then take, and they're probably just as happy. Because let's face it, if the European people are busy running from Nazis, they won't have time to be pissed at their leaders in the US. If the anti-war movement is being attacked by literally terrorist Nazi groups, they won't have time to do anti-war stuff. They'll be like, people will be afraid to go to the streets. They'll be afraid to do an Ukraine war rally because they'll be attacked by the Nazis by terrorists. So they'll have to stay in. They'll be like, yeah, we would do an anti-Ukraine rally. But the last one we did, the Nazis blew the hell out of people and came out with machine guns. We better not do that. There you go. So the Nazis will do their job. They'll probably give them extra arms. Good work, Nazis. Way to keep those anti-war rallies down. You got a bad times coming in Europe. You need to wake up, but I don't think you will. I don't think you will. All right, so just get accustomed to attacks. The days when you strolled out to the sidewalk cafes and enjoyed yourself, the sidewalk cafes ain't going to be open. And if they are, the Europeans won't have any money because their industry will be going to hell. And last but not least, you don't want to do that because there'll be a Nazi riding by on a motorbike with a fully automatic weapon, spraying the neighborhood, pissed because you guys don't want to sacrifice everything for the Nazi movement in Ukraine. Oh, well, I don't know what to tell you guys. That ain't a good thing. But that's kind of, you would be better off if I could say that's what's coming, because it would imply that it hasn't already happened. It's already happened. And that's where we are. Thanks a lot, everybody. Don't forget, everything scrolling across. If you can, smash the like button. Rockfin.com. Make sure you go to my Rockfin page and become a member. You can do either one of two things. Certainly, you can be a member for free, costs nothing, and you'll get 99% of everything that I have. But additionally, if you can do the $9.99 a month, which is to be a subscriber, that's a great help to the channel. As you know, probably Rockfin doesn't have any advertisements. It's a subscriber service, so that will help keep the channel, keep Rockfin up as a free speech platform. But you can still, even if you can't afford it, don't worry about it. Just become a Rockfin member. If you can't do the $9.99 a month, don't even worry about it. If you do the yearly for Rockfin, you get 2 months free. But if you can't, don't worry about it. Appreciate, you're only going to miss really most of the one premium show that I do, which is Wednesday mornings with Scott Ritter. But that is well worth it. But if you can't, don't worry about it. I certainly appreciate everybody, and I understand. Other ways, if you can contribute to keep the channel going, of course, you know, I've got patreon.com, buy me a coffee, and of course PayPal, and I've got what the hell else do I have? And last but not least, I'm a Cash App. There we go. I had to watch it and see it go across. Cash App. So thanks a lot. If you can afford it. If you can't, don't worry about it. You'll enjoy everything that I have. Become a Rockfin member, just in case they toss me off YouTube. You can still see everything I have there. Like I said, with the exception, if you're not a subscriber, you will just miss one show a month at this time. One show a week. That's my Wednesday morning. You'll miss most of that. You can still see part of that. You just right here on YouTube. So thanks a lot, everybody. I got to run. I wish I could do the I wish I could do the super chats. I'll see to try to do a couple of them. Dan in the Outback, I heard Colonel Douglas McGregor said that the Ukraine crisis will tear the EU and NATO apart. Oh yeah, yeah. Especially when more of these nasties arrive as refugees. Absolutely, it's done. NATO and EU is finished, and the U.S. doesn't care because it's done with them. Right? I'm done. After the John gets finished having sex with the prostitute, he doesn't need the prostitute anymore, does he? He's done. He's gotten what he came for. Unfortunately, that's where you guys sit in the EU. When they're done with you, they'll cast you aside. Rick Cheo, thanks a lot. Tip from Rick. Scott Johnson, thanks a lot over there on Rockfin. Also, thank you very much. Mickey Wu says, considering all the man pads the U.S. dumped into Europe black market, I wouldn't want to be flying anywhere in Europe anytime soon. Oh, that's coming. They're going to be shooting down passenger planes, all kind of crazy stuff. So, it is what it is. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Got to run. Got a busy day, but thank you. I wanted to get on here early, and hopefully I'll be back on sometime tonight. Peace.